My name is Juliana Gray. I'm 32 years old, living alone in a penthouse apartment that overlooks the San Francisco Bay. I used to dream of a big, bustling life filled with noise and family. But now, silence is my sanctuary. Last year, I sold the tech company I founded for $4.8 million. Enough to buy time, enough to buy distance, enough to buy peace, or so I thought. But money can't unwrite your past, and it certainly can't unmake the monster who raised you. People say the older you get, the more you understand your parents. I used to believe that, until the night I realized my father had tried to kill me. Not metaphorically, not emotionally. I mean, he laced my wine with poison at a family gathering, with my mother smiling nearby, with candles flickering between the salad bowls and string lights blinking softly above our heads. If I hadn't swapped glasses when I did, quietly, instinctively, like my body knew before my brain could catch up, I would have collapsed that night, just like he planned. But that's not where this story begins. This story begins with the sound of jazz music and clinking wine glasses, and a man saying, "This one's special, darling, just for you." He smiled when he said it, a soft, chilling smile that I'd known since childhood. And that's the thing. This wasn't the first time someone in our family collapsed after sharing a drink with him. My grandfather died that way. Sudden, mysterious, healthy one moment, gone the next. They said it was a heart attack. They always say that. It was my mother's 60th birthday. I remember standing in front of the mirror, smoothing down the emerald green silk blouse she once bought me for college graduation. She always said that color made my eyes look softer, more trusting, like I hadn't spent years building walls around myself. I wore it for her, not him. Not the man who had never once told me he was proud. Not the man who used to yell until his face turned purple and I was too numb to cry. Not the man who once locked me outside in the rain for getting a B+. I drove to the old family house in Pacifica, where fog still hugged the fences like ghosts that never left. The roads were damp, slick with the chill of late autumn. I pulled into the driveway just as the sun dipped behind the pines. The front door creaked open before I even knocked. "Juliana!" my mom called, throwing her arms around me. She smelled like lavender and old books. Familiar, comforting. She squeezed me like I was still 10 years old, and the world hadn't made me hard yet. "You came," she whispered into my hair. "I didn't think you would." "I said I would," I replied, forcing a smile. "I always show up for you." She didn't ask about my father. She never does. The party was in the backyard, beneath the tangled string lights and floating lanterns. My cousins were there, Aunt Danielle, Uncle Theo. Everyone was talking, laughing, drinking. My mother was radiant, floating between tables, her silver hair pinned into a neat bun, her voice soft like a piano lullaby. Then there was him. He stood alone near the edge of the garden, a glass of deep red wine in his hand. That's how he always appears in my memories, apart, watching, judging, sipping, like a shadow dressed in a tailored suit. He locked eyes with me. I looked away. I tried to enjoy the evening, to talk to my cousins, to joke with Aunt Danielle about her obsession with fortune cookies. But I could feel his gaze like a thread pulling tighter around my throat. He approached me near the buffet table. "Juliana," he said smoothly, "you look successful." The word dripped with something sour. "I am," I answered, lifting my chin. He held out a wine glass. The liquid inside shimmered like garnet under the string lights. "This one's special," he said. "I picked it just for you." Something in me paused. The air around us felt colder suddenly, but I took the glass. I had to. My mother was a few feet away, laughing with relatives. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to ruin her night. I didn't want to believe I had to be afraid of my own father. So I smiled. "Thanks, Dad." I raised the glass and sipped. At first it tasted fine, rich, dry, slightly bitter. I set the glass down and turned back to the conversation, nodding along, pretending to listen. But then something shifted. The ground didn't feel steady. My thoughts fuzzed like static. The music became echoes, like it was playing underwater. I blinked. Faces blurred. Heat rose in my chest, my lungs. They couldn't expand. I clutched my throat. "Mom," I whispered. "Mom." But my legs wouldn't move. My hands felt like rubber. The wine glass slipped from my fingers and shattered in the grass. Then, darkness. I woke up in my childhood bedroom. The ceiling fan spun slowly above me. The same ceiling I used to stare at while praying he wouldn't come into my room in one of his drunken rages. I tried to sit up. My head screamed. My limbs felt like stone. "Juliana?" My mother's voice cracked as she gripped my hand. She looked terrified. "You fainted," she whispered. "Outside, you just dropped. Your father said you drank too much, but I saw you." "You only had one glass." I nodded, trying to speak, but my tongue was lead. "I'm taking you to a doctor tomorrow," she said. "I don't care what Robert says. Something wasn't right." She turned away, wiping her eyes, then stopped at the window. "The way you fell, it was exactly how my father died. That night at dinner, with Robert, just collapsed." I stared at her. The chill in my spine reached my fingertips. "Mom," I said slowly, "I think there was something in that wine." That's when everything unraveled. Her expression changed. Her lips parted like she wanted to protest, but no sound came. "You think your father—" "I don't want to believe it either," I whispered. "But Mom, that glass, he said it was special. He watched me drink it, and I've never felt like that before. It wasn't alcohol. It was something else." My mother sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. "I thought I was imagining things," she murmured. "But the look on his face when you collapsed, he wasn't shocked, Juliana. He looked like he was waiting." The silence between us was deafening. Then slowly she reached for my hand again. "Okay," she said. "We'll find out the truth." I left that house the next morning with a mind spinning faster than any storm I'd ever weathered. But there was clarity, too, a resolve I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, hiding bruises beneath long sleeves. This time, I wouldn't hide. I wouldn't protect the man who had done nothing but hurt us. I would find the truth. I would gather evidence. I would watch him fall, just like he tried to watch me. And I'd do it not for vengeance, but for every woman who's ever had to smile across the dinner table at the man who wants her gone. I was 8 years old the first time I realized my father didn't love me, not in the way a father should. He didn't kiss my forehead at bedtime or wait in the rain when ballet practice ran late. He didn't cheer at my spelling bees or frame my drawings from school. Instead, he measured me by obedience. If I was silent when he snapped, I was respectful. If I kept my eyes low during his tantrums, I was well raised. If I cried, God help me if I cried, I was manipulative. Just like her, he'd say, glaring in my mother's direction. Our house looked picture perfect on the outside. White fence, climbing roses, polished cars. But inside, it was a world of whispers and closed doors and air thick with things no one was allowed to name. The worst days weren't when he screamed. They were the quiet ones. When he simply stared, that cold stare, it would pierce through my skin like he wasn't looking at a child, but a liability, a problem, a threat. Even after I moved out at 21, I still felt it. In job interviews, in boardrooms, on dates, that invisible rope of shame tugging me back to a voice that once told me, "You'll never be anything without me." But then I proved him wrong. I built something from scratch. And I watched his jaw tighten every time someone else praised me at family gatherings. I told myself I'd never let him matter again. And for a while, it worked. I visited only on holidays. I kept conversations short. I built boundaries like bricks, one by one. But he kept finding ways to chip at them, backhanded compliments, guilt trips to my mother, random gifts I never asked for, always followed by thinly veiled reminders of how much I owed him. So when he handed me that glass of wine on her birthday, the one he said was special, something inside me rang with a sound I hadn't heard in years, that primal warning, that quiet whisper from childhood. You are not safe. After the hospital visit, I didn't sleep much. My mind replayed the fall, the spinning, the tightness in my chest, my mother's pale face when I woke. It was too precise, too sudden, and too familiar. That's what haunted me most, how easily it mirrored my grandfather's death, her father, a man I never really knew but had seen in old photographs. A tall man with a wide grin standing beside my mother on her graduation day. He died young. Sudden heart failure after a dinner party. But that night, in my old bedroom, when she said, "It felt just like my father," something unspoken passed between us. My mother had buried her suspicion for decades. Now it was clawing back to the surface. The next morning, we sat in her kitchen, both clutching mugs we didn't drink from. "Do you remember what Grandpa drank the night he passed?" I asked. She stared into her tea. "It was red wine," she said softly. "Robert poured it." I let the words sit. "Do you think—" I hesitated, afraid of my own voice. "Do you think he could have done something then, too?" She didn't speak, just nodded, once. The quietest confirmation I'd ever heard. That's when I made my decision. I wouldn't run from the truth anymore. This time, I'd chase it down. And I'd start by testing what was left in that wine glass. I waited until everyone had left the party. The plates had been cleared, the laughter had faded. Only the crickets remained, chirping in the dark corners of the backyard like witnesses too scared to speak. My mother had gone upstairs to lie down, emotionally drained. She didn't fight me when I told her I wanted to stay and clean up. In truth, I was buying time. I walked slowly through the garden, pretending to collect cups and fold napkins, but really I was looking for it, the wine glass my father had drunk from after I swapped it with mine. I spotted it near the azalea bushes. It had been knocked over, but not shattered. A shallow pool of red still clung to its curve like a warning. I took out a tiny glass vial I had brought, the kind that once held essential oils in my office drawer. It wasn't sterile, it wasn't scientific, but it was all I had. With trembling fingers, I poured what was left of the wine into the vial, sealed it tightly, and wrapped it in paper towels. Then I walked inside like nothing had happened. 3 days later, I drove into San Francisco with that vial tucked inside my purse like a secret waiting to explode. I had done my research, found a private toxicology lab downtown with discreet services and a quiet reputation for testing substances outside legal protocols. The kind of place people go when they don't want paperwork. Just truth. The technician who greeted me looked like someone's aunt, gray bob haircut, thick glasses, a floral cardigan. But her eyes were sharp, and she didn't flinch when I handed her the vial. "No name on the file, please," I said. She nodded without asking anything else. "What am I looking for?" she finally asked. "Anything," I said. "Anything that shouldn't be in red wine." She gave a small frown. "Alcohol does strange things," she offered gently. "This wasn't alcohol," I said flatly. "I wasn't drunk. I was drugged. I need to know what it was." She nodded again, her expression darkening. "Come back in 3 days." Those 3 days stretched like years. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face, the way he smiled when he handed me that wine, calm, calculated, like it wasn't the first time. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about how my mother said Robert inherited almost everything after he died. I thought about the way he always talked about my business success like it was a threat. "Nice of you to finally make something of yourself," he once sneered during a Thanksgiving toast. "I guess even the broken clock's right twice a day." What if this was never about legacy? What if it was about control, about money? What if he looked at me and saw not a daughter, but an estate? The call came early, the morning of the 3rd day. It was the lab. "Miss Gray," the technician said, her voice cautious but urgent. "I'd prefer to tell you this in person." That was all I needed to hear. I was out the door in minutes. She handed me a folded report, highlighted in yellow. I read the word once, then twice. Barbiturate, a high concentration, enough to sedate a grown adult in minutes, enough to stop a heart if timed with alcohol or fatigue. My vision blurred. My fingers trembled. "I knew it," I whispered. "I knew it wasn't just wine." The technician leaned forward. "This isn't something you find by accident. Someone put this in intentionally." I nodded, unable to speak. "Do you know who might have done this?" she asked gently. I looked her in the eye. "Yes," I said. "I do." I drove to the beach that afternoon, not to think. I'd done enough thinking. I needed air, salt, wind, something to prove the world was still real, while everything inside me felt like a dream I wanted to wake up from. I stood there, holding the report in my hand, staring at the waves. Barbiturate. The same class of drug my mother once said her father had shown symptoms of. The same sudden collapse, the same confusion, the same exact timeline. The implications were unthinkable. 2 poisoned glasses, decades apart. 2 near deaths in one family. Only one constant between them. Robert Gray. I returned to my apartment and locked every door behind me. Not because I thought he'd show up, but because my world had just shifted and I didn't know which way was up anymore. I placed the report on my coffee table. Next to it, I laid out an old family photo. My mother, my grandfather, and a much younger version of my father standing stiffly in the background. I stared at it. He had always been ambitious, cold. But murder? And yet the evidence was there. I had nearly died, and now I had proof. My father had poisoned me, and if I didn't stop him, he would do it again. I didn't tell my mother right away, not because I didn't trust her, but because I knew the moment I said the words, "He poisoned me," something in her would break. And I needed her strong, not scared, not shattered. So I waited until Sunday morning when the sky was still silver and the world hadn't yet woken. I drove back to the family house with the report folded in the pocket of my coat. My mother was already up, standing by the sink, drying a cup that had long since dried. She turned when she saw me, and her smile collapsed into worry. "What is it?" she asked immediately. I reached for the stool at the counter and sat down slowly. "I had the wine tested," I said. She froze. Her hands fell to her sides, the towel dangling like a forgotten thought. "And?" I pulled out the report and slid it across the counter. Her eyes scanned the paper. Her lips moved as she read the highlighted words aloud. "Barbiturate, high concentration." Silence. Then her hands began to tremble. She clutched the edge of the counter to steady herself, but her knees gave in anyway, and she sat down slowly across from me. "No," she whispered. "No, no, not again." I didn't speak. I let her feel it. Let her absorb it fully, because this was more than about me. This was about the ghost that had haunted her for years, the shadow over her father's death, the suspicion she'd never spoken aloud. "You told me Grandpa collapsed after dinner," I said gently, "and Robert was with him." She nodded slowly, tears clinging to her lashes. "They had wine, just the two of them. I was in the living room talking to my aunt. I heard the glass fall." Her voice cracked. "When I rushed in, he was on the floor, eyes open, gone." "They said heart attack?" She nodded again, this time shakier. But it never made sense. He had just had a full checkup. No issues. Nothing. And who inherited the estate? The question made her flinch. "Robert," she whispered. "They'd just signed the property transfer. My father was going to step down, retire. Robert would take over the land, the accounts, the vineyard." "Did anyone question that?" She shook her head, numb now. "No one suspected a thing. My father had always trusted Robert, said he had a good head for business, and I loved him. I never thought—" Her voice dissolved. I reached across the counter and took her hand. "You weren't wrong to love him," I said quietly. "But you weren't wrong to be afraid either." We sat like that for a long time, our hands clasped between us, as the morning light slipped through the kitchen curtains like forgiveness. Later that afternoon, I asked if I could go through the study. She hesitated at first, old habits of fear and silence, but eventually nodded. "I haven't touched anything in there in years," she said. "He kept it locked most of the time." The study hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Dark mahogany desk, shelves lined with books I don't think he ever read, a locked cabinet in the corner. "I think I remember the code," my mother said, her voice small. I watched her walk to the cabinet and type in 4 digits, their wedding date. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small metal safe, and beneath it, a worn leather notebook. She took it out, brushing the dust from the cover. "This was my father's journal," she whispered. We sat on the couch and opened it together. Most of the entries were simple, warm. Notes about vineyard yields, meetings with clients, dinners with friends. But the last few pages changed. We read them aloud, side by side. "Robert's behavior has shifted lately, distant, secretive. He offered me wine tonight, just the two of us. Something felt off. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because part of me doesn't feel safe." The next page. "Felt dizzy after dinner. Breathing short, vision blurred. I'm writing this down in case something happens. If it does, look into it." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. She stared at the page like it might scream. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He knew. My father knew." And with that, it all came crashing down. Not just the truth, but the years built on the lie. Her marriage, his reputation, our family dinners, all built on silence. I told her about my plan, to confront him, not with rage, with facts, evidence, and a witness, her. She hesitated. "Juliana, he's dangerous," she said. "If he could do this to your grandfather, to you—" "I know," I said. "That's why we can't stay silent anymore." She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. And for the first time in my life, I saw the girl my mother used to be before Robert Gray hollowed her out. She looked fierce. She looked ready. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed staring at the two items in front of me: my grandfather's journal, the toxicology report, 2 generations. 2 poisoned glasses, 2 lives almost stolen by the same man, and only one thing left to do. It was time to flip the script, to turn the predator into the prey, because this time, I wasn't the one drinking the wine. They say the most dangerous moment in any confrontation isn't the first blow. It's the silence before it. That breath where everything could still go either way. I spent the next week preparing for that silence. Every spare hour was dedicated to lining up the facts, securing the files, and making sure that when I faced my father, I would hold all the power. Not just emotionally, but legally. Because I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a survivor. And now, I was becoming something else. A witness. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A woman named Annalise Byrne. A sharp, discreet criminal attorney whose name I'd heard whispered at a women's tech conference 2 years earlier. The kind of lawyer you only call when the law becomes a battlefield and you're willing to fight. I didn't tell her everything on the phone, just enough. "Attempted poisoning," I said. "Suspect is a family member. There's history. I have physical evidence and a witness." She asked only one question. "Are you safe?" "For now." We met in her office 2 days later. It smelled like leather and eucalyptus. No family portraits, no clutter. Just books, order, and a calm intensity that told me she didn't lose. I laid everything on the table, literally. The toxicology report, a copy of my grandfather's journal, an old photo of the night my father collapsed after drinking the glass I'd swapped with mine. She read silently for nearly 10 minutes, eyebrows slowly rising. When she finished, she folded her hands. "This is stronger than most homicide cases I've seen go to court," she said. "You're not imagining anything, Juliana. He tried to kill you." I swallowed. "Will the police take this seriously?" "They will with me involved," she said. "But the question is, do you want him arrested now, or do you want to confront him first?" I hesitated. Some part of me wanted immediate justice, wanted him dragged away in cuffs, wanted to be done with this nightmare. But another part, the part that had waited for years to be seen, to be heard, to be believed, needed one more thing. I needed him to say it, to say he did it, to say I wasn't crazy. I looked Annalise in the eyes. "I want to confront him first." She nodded. "Then we do this carefully." The next step was planning the setup. If he was going to confess, it had to be face-to-face, in private, but not too private. I needed a witness, someone he wouldn't suspect. My mother volunteered. "I've spent 30 years listening to him lie," she said. "It's time I finally hear him tell the truth." We decided the best opportunity was the following weekend. My mother would invite him over for tea under the pretense of talking things through. I would arrive midway, unexpected but not suspicious. We'd talk in the living room. Calm. Collected. I would bring the report and the journal but keep them hidden unless needed. And, just in case, I would have my phone recording in my coat pocket. Not to entrap him, but to protect the truth. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment, reciting what I would say. How do you tell your father you know he tried to kill you? How do you say those words and keep your voice steady? I practiced in the mirror, again and again, until my mouth could shape the syllables without trembling. I am not afraid of you. I know what you did. I'm not a little girl anymore. The morning of the confrontation arrived cloudy and still. I dressed carefully, no jewelry, no heels, just a dark blue blouse and jeans, simple, grounded. I didn't want to look like I came for war. I wanted to look like I came for truth. My mother opened the door with puffy eyes and steady hands. "He's in the living room," she whispered, "reading the paper, like nothing happened." I kissed her cheek. "Let's change that." I stepped inside. There he was, my father, Robert Gray, legs crossed, glasses on, holding a cup of coffee like it didn't burn. He looked up. "Juliana," he said, "this is unexpected." I smiled slightly. "Mom said she wanted to talk. I figured I'd join." He nodded slowly, measuring my tone. "By all means." I sat across from him, my coat still on, my phone recording silently inside the pocket. My mother entered the room with a tray of tea and placed it on the table between us. She sat next to me, hands folded, silent. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I leaned forward. "Dad," I said calmly, "I need you to tell me what was in the wine you gave me on Mom's birthday." His brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "The one you called special. The one I drank. The one that made me collapse." He scoffed. "Juliana, don't be ridiculous." "I tested it," I said. "What was left in your glass after I swapped them?" His face flickered. "Barely, but enough." "Barbiturate," I said. "A lethal dose, enough to stop a heart." My mother gasped beside me. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on him. He shifted, licked his lips. "I don't know where you got that nonsense." "You don't have to pretend," I said, voice low. "We're past that." I pulled the journal from my coat and placed it on the table. My grandfather's handwriting stared up at him. "He wrote this the night he died," I said. "Said he felt off after dinner, after drinking wine with you." Robert's face hardened. "And now I've got the same symptoms, from the same source, from you." I leaned forward. "I need you to tell the truth." The silence was so thick I could hear the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Then, slowly, his shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in resignation, like someone who'd been waiting to be caught. "I didn't mean to kill you," he said, voice suddenly hoarse. "I just needed time. I needed access. I thought I could knock you out, forge the will, transfer your business. That was it. No one was supposed to die." My mother broke into a sob. He looked at her. "I was desperate," he said. "You don't understand, Margaret. I'm drowning in debt. The vineyard's gone. The land's worthless. I had no other way." I stared at him. "You always had a way," I said coldly. "You just never chose one that didn't involve hurting someone." I stood. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned to my mother and held out my hand. She took it. Together we walked out the front door, left him there, alone with the poison he poured, and the truth he could no longer bury. The silence after confession is heavier than the words themselves. Once my father admitted it, once the truth finally crawled out of his mouth like poison from an old wound, Something inside me collapsed, not with pain, not with shock, but with exhaustion. Decades of holding back the doubt, the ache, the quiet suspicion. Gone. No more wondering if I was imagining things. No more twisting myself into forgiveness for a man who had never once asked for it. No more protecting the lie to preserve a family that had rotted from the inside out. I wasn't crying when we walked out of that house, but my mother was. She wept into her scarf as we stepped into the car. I started the engine, but didn't drive. Not yet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have known. I should have stopped it a long time ago." I reached across the gear shift and took her hand. "Don't apologize," I said. "You didn't poison anyone." "No," she said. "But I let him poison our lives." Her voice cracked like old porcelain. "For years, Juliana, I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping us safe. But I see now, I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting him." Her eyes turned to mine, wet, wild, broken open in a way I had never seen before. "And it almost killed you." We didn't go home. Instead, I drove us to a small overlook on the cliffs above the Pacific. The wind there is different, saltier, stronger, like it's been carrying secrets for centuries. We sat on a wooden bench facing the sea. My mother pulled her coat tighter around her. I wrapped the blanket I kept in the back seat around her shoulders. And for a long time, neither of us said a word. Because what is there to say when the man you shared a home with, the man who fathered your child, shared your bed, signed birthday cards and danced at weddings, is now something else? A murderer, a thief of life, not once, but twice. "Your grandfather," she finally said, her voice barely above the wind. "He used to write me letters." I looked at her. "He wasn't affectionate with words, not face to face," she went on. "But he used to leave little notes in my coat pocket, in my books, on the fridge, just 1 or 2 lines." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a yellowing envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same as in the journal. She opened it and handed it to me. It read, "Margaret, a man's legacy isn't in what he builds, it's in who he protects." I read it 3 times, and then once more, quietly to myself, she turned her face toward the sea. I ignored his fears. I chalked them up to stress, to age. I thought Robert would never... not him. "You couldn't have known," I said softly. "But you did," she replied, "with just 1 glass." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch at her place, staring at the ceiling, counting each creak in the house. It felt strange being here again, back in the very same space where years ago I used to lie in bed and pray for the storm outside to drown out the storms inside. But this time I wasn't a child, and the monster in the house was no longer hiding, he was exposed, and that changed everything. The next morning, Annalise called. She'd listened to the recording. "I have enough to file criminal charges," she said. "Attempted murder, premeditated. Your grandfather's case may take longer, but we're already building it." I sat up. "What happens next?" "You decide," she said. "We can go to the police now, or we can wait and gather more. But Juliana, once this starts, it won't stop. The court process is long. Ugly, brutal. Are you ready?" Was I? I looked around the kitchen, my mother's tea kettle steaming gently, the old calendar still showing the wrong month, the air scented with cinnamon and grief. Was I ready to drag every painful truth into a courtroom, to watch my father deny it all, to watch people gasp in disbelief, to listen to character witnesses tell me who they thought he was? Maybe not, but the question wasn't if I was ready. It was if I could live with myself if I stayed silent. And I already knew the answer. 3 days later, we filed the charges. The detective assigned to the case read the report silently, then played the recording twice. His expression hardened. "This man is your father?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He nodded slowly. "You've done the right thing." Those words shouldn't have made me cry, but they did. The news spread faster than I imagined, first to extended family, then to the community. Everyone had an opinion. Some were horrified, some didn't believe it. Some tried to blame my mother, but she didn't waver. She showed up to every meeting. She gave her statement. She testified to her memories. She held my hand like we were walking through fire together, because we were. One night, as we prepared for the preliminary hearing, she sat beside me on the couch and said, "You broke the chain, Juliana." "What do you mean?" "You ended the silence, the pretending, the cycle of fear, what your grandfather tried to warn me about. You did what I couldn't." She smiled through her tears. "You saved me." And that's when I understood. This wasn't just justice for me or for him. It was for her, too. For every woman who thought enduring was the only way to survive. I used to think courtrooms were loud, that there'd be shouting, dramatic gasps, papers flying, and slamming gavels like in movies. But real courtrooms are quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence where your heartbeat becomes the loudest thing in the room. And that morning, as I sat beside my mother in the cold beige courtroom with fluorescent lighting and creaky wooden benches, my heartbeat was all I could hear. My father sat across from us at the defense table, dressed in a dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression unreadable, not remorseful, not angry, just blank. I'd seen that look before. It's the one he wore every time he watched me cry and said nothing. The one he wore the day I told him I had gotten into Stanford, and he replied, "Don't get cocky." The one he wore the night he handed me that wine. Annalise stood confidently before the judge, her presence like steel wrapped in velvet, calm, precise, but unshakably firm. "Your Honor," she said, "we will present evidence that Robert Gray knowingly and intentionally attempted to drug his daughter, Ms. Juliana Gray, with a sedative called barbiturate in order to incapacitate her and forge legal documents for financial gain." She paused. "We also intend to establish a pattern of behavior connected to the suspicious death of Ms. Gray's grandfather, Walter Harrison, over 2 decades ago, which involved similar symptoms and an unexplained inheritance transfer that disproportionately benefited the defendant." Gasps didn't erupt, but heads turned. Even the judge blinked twice. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was legacy on trial. My mother was called first. She sat tall in the witness chair, her fingers visibly trembling only when she clutched the glass of water offered by the bailiff. She told the truth about the night of my collapse, about the similarities with her father's death, about the journal we'd found, her father's last warnings, recorded just days before he died. She even told the court about the guilt, about the years she spent doubting herself, silencing her intuition, protecting the image of a husband who had, in truth, torn their family apart from the inside. The courtroom was silent, except for one sound. My father shifting in his seat, impatient, agitated, cornered. Then came the recording, Annalise asked for it to be played aloud. The judge approved. I felt my breath stop when the static faded and my own voice filled the courtroom. I tested it, the wine, after I swapped the glasses. Silence. Barbiturate. Silence again. Then his voice. I didn't mean to kill you. I just needed time. I thought I could knock you out. Forge the will. That was it. No one was supposed to die. My mother closed her eyes. The judge leaned forward. The room was a glacier, frozen solid. Then, suddenly, a murmur broke out among the back row. A reporter or a relative, quickly silenced by the bailiff's glare. But it was done. The truth was now public, spoken aloud, recorded, irreversible. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't even look at him, because I didn't need to anymore. He could no longer pretend. The words had come from his own mouth. Not mine, not my mother's. His. And everyone heard, even him. After the audio ended, the courtroom didn't erupt. It simply breathed. A collective, restrained gasp of realization passed through the room like a ripple through still water. Every person in that space, strangers, jurors, clerks, family friends seated in the back, understood they had just heard something irreversible. But not my father. He didn't flinch, not visibly. He stared straight ahead at the judge, jaw set, one hand folded neatly over the other. If there was shame in him, it had been buried deep beneath layers of control and calculation. Maybe that was his true talent. He could lie without ever needing to open his mouth. After the recess, the defense tried to discredit everything. Their lawyer, a man named Lowell Pierce, older and hunched from years of defending white-collar criminals, argued that the confession was taken out of context, that my father had been emotionally distressed, that he was a desperate man, yes, but not a criminal. He blamed the debt, the pressure, even tried to imply my mother and I had conspired against him to gain access to the last of his remaining assets. I couldn't help but scoff. I'd built my own life, my own success. What I wanted from him was never money. It was acknowledgement, and when I didn't get it, I walked away. It was he who followed me with poison. Then they turned their attention to me. Mr. Pierce stood before the court and said I was unreliable, that I misunderstood, that I'd always had conflict with my father. He said I had a flair for drama, citing my highly emotional reaction the night of the incident as proof that my judgment was compromised. And yet, when he played the same audio again, the part where my father explicitly described his plan, he looked down at his shoes the entire time. Even he couldn't face what was there. The hardest part wasn't listening to them try to twist the truth. It was watching how many people didn't know what to believe. That's the thing about abuse, especially the kind that hides behind big houses, tailored suits, and carefully planned charity events. It looks impossible, unthinkable. How could a man like Robert Gray, the respected vineyard owner, the loving husband, the proud father, do something like this? I could see it in the jury's eyes. They were struggling, not with the evidence. That part was airtight, but with their own biases, their own need to believe that monsters wear visible masks. The turning point came when Annalise called the toxicologist, a woman named Dr. Ava Melrose, direct, sharp, and devastatingly specific. She laid out the dosage, the chemical breakdown, the way the wine interacted with the drug, how the levels in the sample could have induced unconsciousness within minutes. And then she said the one thing that shattered any reasonable doubt. This wasn't trace contamination. This was intentional insertion. Someone added it deliberately, and based on the quantity, it was either a fatal mistake or an attempted murder. No one could argue with science, not even legacy. After that, the question shifted. The jurors no longer looked confused. They looked afraid. Afraid of the kind of evil that smiles at family dinners. Afraid of the man who passed champagne to his daughter, knowing what swam inside the glass. Afraid of the idea that your own blood could wish you gone and mean it. When the prosecution rested, there was nothing left to say, and yet my father requested to speak. The judge, after a tense pause, allowed it. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket like he was stepping onto a gala stage, and approached the witness box. For the first time in the entire trial, I felt a tremor of something cold trace my spine. He looked at the jury, then at the judge, then directly at me. "Juliana is mistaken," he said simply. "She's emotional, vulnerable. She's always looked for reasons to make me the villain in her life. I tried to support her. I admit, I failed at times, but never, never would I harm her." He paused, letting the silence stretch, and then he said, almost tenderly, "She's my daughter." The room held its breath, but this time the silence didn't protect him, because truth, once released, cannot be swallowed back down, no matter how clean your suit, no matter how still your hands. I stared back at him, unblinking, because he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to a jury who didn't know the man I had survived, but they would, soon. I glanced at the clock on the wall. We were almost at the end of the trial, of the pretense, of his illusion of control. The weight of it all pressed against my chest. But I didn't break, because somewhere deep inside me, a chain had already snapped, and the truth was running free. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, not 12, not 2 days. 4 hours, long enough to be careful, short enough to be damning. My mother and I sat in the hallway the entire time, hands clenched in silence. Neither of us spoke, not because we didn't have things to say, but because the words wouldn't form properly around the weight we carried. It was like standing on a cliff and waiting for either wings or gravity. When the clerk finally emerged and called us back in, my knees nearly buckled beneath me. But I walked, one foot in front of the other, because this was the moment I'd carried inside me since the night I tasted poison in my father's special wine. We sat. The room filled again. Reporters had gathered outside the doors. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in a decade had come, suddenly curious. The judge re-entered. Everyone rose, then sat again. The air buzzed, electrified with something just beneath sound. The jury foreman, a young woman with tight curls and a face that revealed nothing, stood up, a white slip of paper in her hands. The judge nodded. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please read it." My fingers dug into the bench. I didn't realize I was holding my mother's hand until she squeezed back. The foreman cleared her throat. "In the case of the State versus Robert Gray, on the count of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." A gasp. Someone sobbed behind us. I didn't move. Not yet. The foreman continued. "In the matter of the suspicious death of Walter Harrison, with evidence supporting homicide through the unlawful administration of a sedative agent," I held my breath, "we find the defendant guilty." The room blurred. For a moment, I couldn't feel my body, only the sound of those 2 words echoing through every version of me. The child, the grown woman, the daughter who was told to be quiet, the survivor who refused to stay silent. Guilty. He was guilty. The judge looked down at my father, eyes cold and heavy. "Robert Gray," she said, "you are hereby convicted of both attempted murder and first-degree murder. Sentencing will follow after formal psychiatric evaluation, but given the evidence and the nature of your crimes, the court finds you unfit for bail. You will be remanded to state custody effective immediately." She struck her gavel once, final, severing. 2 bailiffs approached my father. He didn't resist, didn't flinch, just stood slowly, like it was all an inconvenience, like it had been inevitable. Maybe, deep down, he had known all along this was how his story would end, not in glory, but in disgrace. As they cuffed his hands, I thought he wouldn't look back, but he did. Just once. His eyes found mine, still calm, still empty. And then, a flicker. Something like regret. Or maybe just surprise that I had the strength to finish what he started. He was escorted away, and the doors closed behind him. We didn't move. No one said anything to us. Not yet. They stared, yes, whispered, but not one person spoke directly to me, and I didn't need them to, because in that moment, as the fluorescent lights flickered above, I finally exhaled. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. Outside the courtroom, reporters surrounded us. "Ms. Gray, how do you feel? Is this justice? What would you say to other victims who are still silent?" I paused, then turned toward the cameras, not as a performance, but as an offering. "Believe your instincts," I said, "even when they sound too quiet, even when the person you're afraid of shares your last name." And with that, I walked past the microphones and didn't look back. That night, we didn't celebrate. There were no champagne toasts or victory speeches. Just me and my mother, sitting on her porch, watching the sky turn from gold to violet. She held her tea with both hands. I held nothing, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. "You did it," she whispered. "You got justice for yourself, and for him." I knew who she meant, her father, the man who had whispered his suspicions in a journal and died before anyone could hear him. "I didn't do it alone," I said softly. "You stood with me." She reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear like she used to when I was little. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I wish I'd said it sooner." I looked at her. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I realized I was crying. That's all I ever wanted to hear. Later that evening, I opened my laptop. There, waiting in my inbox, were messages I hadn't expected. Strangers, daughters, sons, spouses, people who had seen the trial on the news, read the headlines, watched the clips. They wrote about suspicion, about manipulation, about the violence that hides behind charm. Most of them said the same thing in different ways. I thought I was the only one. I spent hours reading them, responding to as many as I could, because I remembered that feeling, that aching loneliness, that crushing disbelief that someone who is supposed to love you could also be the one who wants to see you disappear. Before I went to bed, I picked up the framed photo on my mother's mantel. It was of my grandfather and me. I was just a baby, nestled in his arms. He was laughing, genuine, full-hearted, a kind of joy I didn't remember, but now I could almost feel. I traced my finger along the edge of the frame. "We heard you," I whispered. "I promise. We finally heard you." After the courtroom emptied and the headlines faded, what remained wasn't peace. It was silence, heavy, unfamiliar silence. Not the kind that comes with rest, but the kind that settles in after a storm, when the wreckage is still wet and scattered and you're not quite sure what can be salvaged yet. The trial had ended. The sentence had been announced. Robert Gray, my father, was gone from our lives in every visible way. But he remained in the small things. The drawer I hadn't opened in 10 years, still filled with his paperwork. The garage radio still tuned to his favorite station. The old whiskey bottle tucked behind the cabinet, untouched since the night I collapsed. My mother couldn't bring herself to throw them away yet. She said it felt like amputating a limb, even one that had tried to kill her. For the first 2 weeks, we barely left the house. There were sympathy cards from strangers, awkward voicemails from distant cousins, even a few letters of apology from people who had once defended him. But none of it felt like closure. Because closure implies something sealed, something done. This was something else entirely, like a wound that was no longer bleeding, but still too raw to touch. One morning, I woke up to find my mother standing at the back fence. She was barefoot, wrapped in her robe, just staring at the vineyard. What used to be the vineyard, anyway. Most of the vines had withered over the past 2 years, neglected, unloved, like they too had known the hands that once tended them were not kind. "I'm thinking of selling the land," she said when I joined her. I glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded slowly. "It was never really mine. My father meant it for both of us, for family, but it became something else." She swallowed hard. "A monument to control." I helped her draft the paperwork. We found a local woman, Emma Tanaka, who ran a sustainable flower farm and had been looking for adjacent land to expand. When she came to visit, she walked the property with quiet reverence. "This land wants to breathe again," she said softly. My mother smiled, and for the first time since the trial, I saw color return to her cheeks. We finalized the sale 3 weeks later. Emma planned to keep part of the vines, for memory, she said, and plant lavender, wildflowers, and olive trees along the hillside. She offered to let my mother keep the house, rent-free. "I think you've earned peace," she said. My mother cried, not because she was sad, but because, in the rubble of everything we lost, something new had dared to bloom. As for me, I returned to the city, not to escape, but to begin again. People asked if I would go back into tech, if I'd launch another startup, build another company. Maybe I will someday. But for now, I spend most of my days writing, not code, but stories, about survival, about women who see clearly even when no one believes them, about glass raised in celebration, and what it really means to survive what was poured into it. The first person from the family to reach out wasn't who I expected. It wasn't my aunt, who used to braid my hair when I was little. It wasn't my cousin Daniel, who I once confided in about my father's temper. It was Uncle Gerard, my mother's older brother, a man who had moved to Canada 20 years ago and sent birthday cards without return addresses. His message was short. "Juliana, I watched the trial. I believe you. I always believed something was wrong. I just didn't know how to help. I'm sorry I left you alone with him." I read that message over and over, and then I called him. We spoke for hours. He told me stories I had never heard, about the early years before I was born, how my father charmed everyone with his manners and wine expertise, how quickly things changed once he married my mother. "How could none of you say anything?" I asked. He sighed, long and broken. "Because your mother asked us not to." because she begged us to keep the family intact, and because back then, women weren't believed, even when they had bruises. I felt my throat tighten. She never had bruises. Not the kind you see, he said gently. Later that week, my cousin Daniel wrote. He was short and nervous in his tone, trying to bridge the gap between support and shame. I didn't want to believe it, Jules. He was like a god to all of us. But after hearing that recording, I see now how much I refused to see. I'm so sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I didn't know how to respond, not right away, because there was still a part of me that remembered sitting at family gatherings, trying to speak, only to be told, "Don't stir things up, Juliana. It's just how your father is." Still, I answered, not because I forgave everything, but because I was learning to let go of the weight that never belonged to me in the first place. Healing, I was discovering, wasn't always loud. It was often found in quiet acts, like returning a call you don't want to, or showing up to coffee with someone who once doubted your pain, or simply breathing through a memory that used to choke you. My therapist, yes, I'd started seeing one, told me something that stuck. "Survivors often look for love where the wounds are," she said. "But family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by who stays when the storm hits." I thought about that for days, and when my mother's friend Judith came by with homemade soup and sat with her for hours, brushing her hair and listening to her read from a book she loved. When my old college roommate Marissa sent me a care package with handwritten notes tucked into every item. When Emma, the new owner of the vineyard, invited us to see the first rows of wildflowers beginning to bloom, I realized my family had never disappeared. I just had to find them. One Sunday afternoon, I invited them all over. Not to celebrate anything in particular, just to gather. Judith brought apple cake. Marissa brought tea blends she swore could soothe trauma and taxes alike. Emma brought fresh-cut lavender, the stems still cool with morning dew. We sat around the backyard table, me, my mother, and these women who had held us together when bloodlines broke. At one point, Judith looked at me and said, "You didn't just survive, Juliana, you rebuilt." I didn't reply. I just looked at my mother. She was laughing, really laughing. Not the polite kind she used to give at parties when Robert told a cruel joke in a charming voice, but the full-bodied, radiant kind that made her shoulders shake and her eyes crinkle. And I thought, this is what family feels like. That night, before bed, I opened a blank journal, and I wrote, "Family isn't who holds the knife. It's who helps you stitch the wound and waits while you heal." There was no parade, no confetti, no grand final chapter where the villain fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. What came instead was quiet. Not the brittle quiet of repression, but a softer one, gentle, earned, the kind that follows justice, not in fanfare, but in breath, in mornings where the air no longer feels like a warning, in sleep without alarms under the skin, in the ability to sit alone, in silence, and feel safe. I returned to the courthouse once, not for another trial, but to file a request for access to old case documents, sealed records from my grandfather's death, now reopened under homicide. The clerk was young, distracted. She didn't recognize my name, didn't know who I was, and for the first time I was relieved to be invisible, to be ordinary, to not be the woman whose father made headlines, just a woman looking for answers. The records arrived 2 weeks later in a cardboard box with yellow tape around the corners. Inside, old typed statements, witness notes, a coroner's report. I spread them across my apartment floor, cross-legged like a child in a library. And there he was, my grandfather. Walter Harrison. His words, his concerns, scribbled in margins, voiced quietly during doctor visits. He'd mentioned feeling weak after dinners, complained of nausea, disorientation. The doctor called it aging. I found one note scrawled on the back of an envelope. Robert offered me a glass again, same vintage, said it was to honor the future. I don't trust it. He'd seen it coming, just like I did. We had never met as adults, never spoken about the danger we shared. And yet, our stories were mirrors, one poisoned glass, one dying breath. Except mine lived to speak, and his whispered from the grave. My therapist said this was generational trauma, passed down like bad silverware, but I think it was more than that. It was a curse of silence, a belief that to survive, we had to submit, to smile, to serve. But I didn't submit. And now, the chain was broken. One morning, I drove back to the vineyard. Emma had invited us for the first bloom. Rows of lavender had replaced the old vines, purple, soft, and humming with bees. My mother stood beside me, her eyes glistening as she looked out across the land. "This place feels free now," she whispered. I nodded. "So do we." We walked between the rows, brushing our fingers across the petals. For years, this land had been a prison disguised as legacy. Now, it felt like sanctuary. Later, Emma brought us fresh lemonade and led us to the edge of the field, where she'd placed a small wooden bench facing west. "For reflection," she said, "for remembering." Carved into the wood was a single inscription, "To those who saw through the silence." My mother gasped when she read it, then looked at me. And in that look, I saw every version of her I had known: the fearful wife, the grieving daughter, the apologetic mother, and the woman who finally stood. She squeezed my hand and said the words that had taken a lifetime to arrive. "You saved me, Juliana." That night, I returned to the city. Alone, but not lonely. My apartment was quiet, filled with candles and the scent of dried lavender Emma had sent me home with. I poured myself a glass of tea, not wine, sat by the window, and wrote. I wrote letters I'd never send, to my father, to my grandfather, to the girl I used to be, the one who swallowed her voice at dinner tables and thought fear was just part of growing up. And when I finished, I folded the letters and burned them one by one in a ceramic bowl. Smoke curled upward, ash drifted down, and I felt lighter. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want his ruin. I wanted truth. And I had it now. Not shouted, not screamed, just known. And that was enough. 6 months after the verdict, I moved into a smaller apartment. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to shed the weight of too many walls, too many memories stitched into the corners of my old place. Memories of pacing during trial nights, of trembling while waiting for lab results, of crying alone in the hallway with the recording still playing in my hand. The new place was smaller, but it had more light, fewer shadows, and no ghosts. I unpacked slowly, choosing carefully what to bring from the past. Not the case files, not the articles, not the transcript, just one photo, me and my mother in the field of lavender, a picture taken by Emma without us knowing. We're laughing, really laughing, wind in our hair, joy in our shoulders. I framed it and placed it by the window. That, I decided, was the only history I wanted in view. One evening, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity, or maybe a deeper need, got the better of me. Inside were only a few words, scrawled in a familiar hand. I thought I knew how to control everything. Turns out, I never understood love. I'm sorry. R. I sat down slowly. The page didn't shake in my hands. I didn't cry. There was no wave of rage or grief or even relief. Only stillness. Because this wasn't redemption. It wasn't a request. It wasn't enough to erase anything. But it was real. And sometimes, real is all we ever wanted from the people who lied to us. I showed the letter to my mother. She read it once, then handed it back. "I don't need it," she said simply, and I nodded, because we both knew. Forgiveness isn't always a door you open. Sometimes it's a door you walk past and never return to. That winter, the vineyard bloomed under frost. Not the grapes. Those were mostly gone. But the lavender, the wild flowers, the olive trees. Emma sent photos every other week. Sometimes she invited us up to walk the rows. Sometimes we said yes. Sometimes we didn't. Because healing doesn't live on a schedule. It comes in moments, unexpected, quiet, holy. Like when my mother touched an olive branch and said, "He would have hated this." And I replied, "I know." And we both laughed, not cruelly, but freely. Because freedom, once it comes, lets you joke about the things that once haunted you. I started hosting small writing workshops in the city for survivors, for daughters, for anyone who had a truth but didn't know how to say it out loud. We sat in circles with tea and notebooks and silence that didn't scare us. And we wrote, sometimes in fragments, sometimes in fire, sometimes in softness. And I watched as women found their voices, one sentence at a time, because what we write, we name, and what we name, we reclaim. One night, after everyone left, I stayed behind to clean. I found a torn page left behind on one of the chairs. There were only 4 words written across it. "I am not broken." I taped it to the wall, because neither was I. In early spring, my mother surprised me. She called while I was eating breakfast, her voice softer than usual, but deliberate. "There's something I want to do," she said. "Something for your grandfather." I set down my mug. "I'm listening." She exhaled slowly, the way she always does when she's afraid her ideas will be dismissed. "I want to establish a small foundation," she said, "in his name, for people who've survived domestic manipulation, like us." I didn't speak at first, because something about hearing her say the word survived made my throat ache in the best possible way. Not escaped, not endured, but survived. I could hear her breath on the other end, waiting for my approval like she still thought I might withhold it. I smiled. "I'll help you build it." We named it the Harrison Quiet Foundation, because sometimes the loudest stories are the ones never told. We kept it small, no gala events, no billboards, just a space to fund crisis counseling, survivor writing programs, and trauma-informed therapy for women rebuilding their voices. Emma offered part of the vineyard's old storage house to turn into a retreat center. Marissa helped with branding. Judith donated the first armchair, a deep blue velvet one she claimed could hold 1,000 secrets and still have room for tea. The walls went up, room by room. My mother painted one of them herself, a soft pastel green like her childhood bedroom, where she used to read by flashlight long after lights out. "This color," she said, dipping her brush again, "makes me feel like I have time again." The grand opening wasn't grand, just us. A few close friends, some new volunteers. We lit candles and sat in the circle room, listening to each other share what silence had cost us and what truth had given back. My mother read a poem she wrote. Her voice trembled, but she made it through. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. No claps, no comments, just stillness. And then someone, an older woman with silver braids, reached across and took her hand. "You gave us a place," she said. And my mother smiled, because for the first time in her life, she didn't have to beg to be heard. I visited the retreat once a week. Sometimes I taught. Sometimes I just listened. But always, I returned to the bench by the lavender fields, the one with the carving, to those who saw through the silence. It became a ritual. Me, the wind, and the scent of something blooming. One evening, I brought a small box of things. Inside, my grandfather's journal, the page from the trial transcript where my father confessed, and the letter he wrote from prison. I buried them at the base of the olive tree nearest the bench, not to forget, but to anchor, to plant what tried to destroy me into the soil of something that would outlive all of us. I don't know what became of my father. He was sentenced to life with no parole. His appeal was denied. The last time I heard his name was in a lawyer's email about property he no longer had claim to. I didn't open it. Some ghosts are best left unopened. 1 year to the day after the verdict, I stood in front of a room full of women and told my story. All of it. Not the polished version, not the courtroom version, but the version with trembling hands, with the moment I swapped glasses, with the breath that almost never came back. And at the end, I said, "This story doesn't end in a courtroom. It ends in a garden, in a mother who paints walls, in women who write, in daughters who decide the story will end with them, not begin with them." The room went quiet, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was reverent, sacred, the kind of quiet that follows truth like a standing ovation. I went home that night and stood by the window of my new apartment. Outside, the city pulsed with light. Inside, I held a cup of tea and whispered to the girl I used to be, "You made it." And she whispered back, "I knew you would." And that is how I uncovered a 20-year murder secret hiding behind a glass of wine and a father's smile. I didn't set out to destroy him. I only wanted the truth. But sometimes, truth is enough to tear down an empire built on silence. If you're still watching this and your gut is screaming about something, don't ignore it. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, to stop making waves, or that family means loyalty no matter what they do, let this story be your permission to choose yourself. Because survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about reclaiming your voice, your name, your story. So, if you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or trapped behind the image of someone everyone else adores, leave a comment. Tell me your story, or just type, "I'm not alone," because you're not. Like this video if it gave you chills. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe, because I promise there are more stories like this one, more truths waiting to be told, and maybe yours is next.